course. Hello, homies, and a very warm welcome to Homeopathy Hangouts. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Ariane Zappe, and I probably said your name wrong now, so you'll have to say it again. Welcome to the show, Ariane.
Thank you very much. And it's absolutely perfect. That's fine. I know it's a difficult name.
It's lovely to have you on. Before we start, I just have to say to our listeners just how cool Ariane is. She was the youngest and first female pilot for Lufthansa, which I just think is amazing. I mean, what can you just, before we get into the homeopathy stuff, just please tell us a little bit about that.
It all started with my father being a fighter pilot, and it was kind of flying was what I was raised with. And so it was just, I think, the most normal thing for me to step into his shoes. And since there was no way to be a fighter pilot at that time, it was Lufthansa, and I loved it. It was a great time. I flew for 7 years on the Airbus 320 and then 2 years on the Airbus A340. But then when it comes to family, and I have 3 children, it's a very difficult job to combine with having babies. So it was absolutely fine for me to stop at that time and stay with my family.
I do love on your website how you have lots of flight terminology and images on your website as well. Like,
Yeah.
let's take off with your health, things like that.
Yeah, it's still a big part of my life, of course.
Of course. And please tell us, Ariana, I ask all my guests, how were you first introduced to homeopathy?
Yeah, I actually know the day and when that happened. It was my oldest son was about 7, my second son was 2, and my oldest son at that age was bitten by a bee or stung by a bee, and he kind of fainted. He had a little bit like an anaphylactic reaction. And then one of my friends was there, and she took out some cool white little sugar pills, and it was apis, and
Mhm.
that apis mellifica, and she gave it to her, and he kind of immediately, color came back to his face. He became stable. He didn't faint. And this is something that I cannot stand, if other people know cool stuff that I don't know. So that day I decided to buy a book of Professor Vitulkas,
Mm.
and I read it. I think it was called Medicine of the Future. I don't know if it's available in English, but in
I think
German
Medicine of the
definitely.
New Man. It's called in English, Medicine of the New Man.
Okay. And I think in 24 hours, I went through it and I was absolutely thrilled. And that was the start of it. And then, of course, I did the classic homeopathic study with Dr. Vitolkas, and it was all for the family. Never intended to open a practice or even research myself and write books by myself. But this is now like 18 years ago. So for a long time, I did all kinds of courses, studied books. I think there was a time when there were like 10 books per week arriving at my home, and the whole family thought she's gonna go crazy now. And then, yeah, after a couple of years, I did the German Heilpraktiker, which is kind of an alternative therapist, which is a luxury in Germany because we have this kind of profession and we are allowed to treat people, to provide them with the diagnosis. So I did that and then opened the practice, got to learn a lot about Dr. Klinghardt. I did all his courses. I worked together with him for 2 or 3 years. We wrote 2 books together. And then I followed this path where I had this deep, deep conviction until today that there is no evil or pathogen or disease bringing microbe by nature. And I followed that, and I researched day and night in the normal medical studies, which provide an enormous amount of information. But I decided to evaluate these studies on the basis of this new or different view. The view that microbes are not evil is not my idea, it's
Mhm.
old. And I know homeopaths always had this view, Hahnemann, and there was this old argument between Bichon and Pasteur. Pasteur was the one who decided it's the microbes that bring disease. And then there was Bichon who said, I don't think so. I think it's the milieu, it's the body, it's the environment where microbes cannot function properly. But that was the time when our medical community decided to go with Pasteur. And then everything that came thereafter, and that was the last 150 years, was based on this idea. So it is all logical what we did. When we are convinced that microbes are the disease-bringing agent, then we have to identify the evil, we have to fight it, and we have to protect ourselves against it. So everything that we build upon this fundament is logic in this model. But now when we say, okay, let's try a new model, let's try a new fundament, which we need because we have this enormous amount of chronic disease and we have no explanation for that. And we have no treatment. Our medicine is fantastic in treating symptoms, and I do not want to not take this advantage. It's phenomenal if we can help people ease pain, if we can treat tumors, and if we can protect people that are not strong enough for integrating microbes. But when it comes to chronic disease, we do not really know what's going on, and we have no solution to go back to a healing process. And chronic disease is everything from tiredness, exhaustion, sleeping problems, cancer, neurological problems, multiple sclerosis, on. And there was in 2021, there was a study saying in the US, it was 60% of all adults that had at least one diagnosis of a chronic disease. And that does not include all the people that have these weird symptoms that do not fit into a diagnosis, like this terrible exhaustion, not being able to function, also depression, anxiety, all these things. So there is a need for a new understanding of what is going on. And I think the problem was 150 years ago when we just decided to go with Pasteur. So when we decide, okay, let's try a new fundament, let's say that was when we took a wrong path. But then when we say there is no evil pathogen, what is going on in our organism then? What is the task of the immune system? If the immune system is not fighting against pathogens, what is it doing? So this was the beginning of what I called Medicine Reloaded, and what my latest book is about, which was just published last week.
Mm-hmm. Just last week. Wow. Hot off the press.
Yes.
I would love to just know more about your book and more about this pathogens. There's this podcast called Terrain Theory. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard, but I have an idea of what it is about.
Yeah. The whole podcast is basically about, how there's no such thing as pathogens. And so this is, I don't know that when I first heard that, I was like, okay, this is definitely an area that I need to find out more about, but it's still completely new to me. So I would love to hear a little bit more on your thinking around this. And how did you even find out about that? Or how did you start going into that direction? What was it that led you that way?
I think one of my key experiences was that I was in Seattle when we wrote the second book with Dr. Klinghardt. And in our first book, we described a PCR test where now everybody knows what PCR tests are.
Yeah.
And we did it because the first book was about Lyme borreliosis, and it's mainly the experience and the knowledge of Dr. Klinghardt treating Lyme patients. Mm-hmm. And we described this urine PCR test where you can find out whether there is DNA in your urine of Borrelia, Babesia, Bartonella. These were the three, where in the first book, we actually said this is the worst case scenario. And since I had no symptoms and I was working 16 hours a day, I was absolutely convinced that I'm not affected by either one of these microbes. So the test came back positive for all three of me. And that was where in a second, I thought, okay, am I going to go with my own book and finding out that I'm on my path to be very sick because these pathogens are in my organism? Or am I deciding to go another path? And actually, could it be that I'm profiting from these microbes? And that's when I thought, okay, let's find out what is their task, what is the benefit that we have from these microbes. And that was back in, I think, 2017 or 16, 17. And then that was the start of the first book, Immune Symbiosis, when I came up with this name. And I'm going like thinking backwards. I take studies, I see the results, and then I interpret them in a way thinking of what is the profit of this germ? What is its task as part of the immune system? For me, the immune system or our organism is not separable into, okay, this is human and this is microbes. That's simply not possible because we exchange DNA, RNA, we exchange proteins. Antibodies that we create are actually the translation of microbial proteins into DNA of the plasma cells that then create the antibodies. So there is this absolutely not separable working together in the best way, something that has evolved over millions and millions of years. So this was in 2017. I came up with immune symbiosis, and I found out more and more about the positive impact of microbes. And let me give you an example. There is a study that I found about the varicella virus, which is a herpes virus 3. It causes the chickenpox in children, and then later in life, it can cause shingles. And then I found a study that when you actually had the chickenpox as a disease as a child, your risk for brain tumor decreases for 40% in life.
Wow. And
And
I've heard similar studies with measles, and it puts you at a much lower risk for cardiovascular disease later on in life.
Absolutely. You can go on and on and on. And the same study also said that when you had the vaccine for chickenpox, you don't have this protection. And the reason is that the whole virus is providing us with about 1,000 different possibilities to create antibodies. And every antibody, since human and microbial proteins are so similar when it comes to the little peptide structures, every antibody is then going around the body and has a lot of other tasks, not only regulating the virus itself, but also finding, for example, tumor cells. And this happens with influenza virus, measles virus. I have studies for tetanus toxin, diphtheria toxin, poliovirus, streptococcus. So this is what I'm about at the moment. I want to create a huge,
Mind shift.
like a bibliothèque. What is it in English?
Yeah, library.
Libraries. Thank you.
We say bibliothèque in Afrikaans as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what we need is a library where we can go into and say, okay, we see that in this patient, the influenza virus is very active because we find the antibodies or the DNA or whatever. What is the task of influenza virus? And then we can go through that library and we can say, okay, one of the tasks is tumor in a certain area. And then we can go back to the patient and can say, well, is the reason why this microbe is so active and has been activated by this comprehensive immune system because there might be a tumor creating at the moment, which we would maybe find years and years later when it is already way too huge. So this is my idea of a new medicine. It's not, we find a microbe, this is the evil, we fight the microbe, because what happens is we could fight the solution of the body and not the cause of the disease. And then we're happy in the old conventional medicine because we say we have destroyed the influenza virus. Hooray, that's it. But then years later, the person has a huge tumor. And we don't bring up a connection between these things. So this would be my idea, where I would see our system in 10, 20 years, that we have a very comprehensive library accessible for everyone, and we look upon chronic disease in a totally different way.
Holy moly, that is mind-blowing, but also makes so much sense, because the first time I was ever kind of introduced to this is I read an article, and this was maybe, 20 years ago, before I was even into natural medicine, in somewhat a, trashy magazine. saying that this woman, like all sensationalized, this woman was importing parasites from a different country and then ingesting them because they kept her autoimmune disorder at bay. And that was the first time ever that I'm like, holy moly, maybe these bacteria and pathogens and parasites and organisms in our body have a function.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called Hellman therapy. We described it in the Immune Symbiosis book. And it is actually something that is part of our conventional medicine nowadays, that for autoimmune diseases in the gut, like morbus Crohn or colitis ulcerosus, they give them the larvae of these helminths, and they know that there is a strong anti-inflammatory reaction, and that brings down the autoimmune inflammation. And then when the job is done, they get some anti-parasitic medication and the worm can go. And that is one of the fascinating reasons why I think we misunderstood. So same thing, when a person has parasites, it's not that the parasite is causing the disease, but it is part of the solution, part of the effort that the immune system takes to find something to heal the disease. And if we come and we say, okay, we found the parasite is the cause, we kill the parasite, we might put the person in a worse place.
That's very, very interesting. So do we actually just need like a rebranding of parasites and bacteria and viruses, and they're actually just part of our body, but they just look different to our cells?
Yes, please. That is my that is my deepest wish. And every patient that comes to my practice needs to hear this lecture for the first 30 minutes to really get another attitude. And I don't like the word parasites. It's not actually part of my system, because parasite always means there is a creature that is living very egoistically just for its own benefit and profit. And that's not the case. Nature is not functioning like that. Definitely not. And when we come to redefining the immune system, if the immune system is not fighting against pathogens, how is it functioning? It is functioning in a very close and inseparable cooperation with our microbes, definitely. And when we look at percentage, it seems like 99% of our genes in our body are microbial. So we're talking about a big portion of the immune system.
Say 99%.
Yeah, 99% of the genes in our system, in our organism, are microbial, coming from bacteria, viruses, and so on. There was just coming a study that showed that 500 million years ago, we received DNA from bacteria that enables us to see. It's the basis of proteins that enable vision. So that's a clue that if we focus on, in our conventional medicine, if we focus on fighting against microbes, I don't want to fight against my vision. And we are fighting against the biggest part of our organism. And there is no wonder that with this idea, we end up with a lot of chronic disease and disbalance in our system. So last year in August, I always go back to Italy to have some space, some protected space where I can research. And it was my idea to redefine the task of the immune system. And I came across something that is now, there are the first studies since maybe 10 years that showed something that to me was enlightening, something that we didn't know and we still don't really know in medicine. And it is the so-called trained immunity of the stem cells. Now, in our conventional medicine, we see the immune system as two different parts. We just see the human immune system, of course, first of all. And then this human immune system, we divide into two parts. The one is the so-called the innate immune system, which we are born with. It's our first defense. It's like fever, inflammation, but broadband. It's not very specific. And it doesn't learn. It does the same thing all the time. That's the idea of the conventional medicine. So the innate immune system is what we're born with. It doesn't change throughout our life. And it's the first line of defense. And then there is the acquired immune system. And this is the one with the antibodies that we focus on. It's the one that learns, it's one that knows we've been in contact with this pathogen in the conventional medicine. And now the next time we come into contact with this pathogen, we are prepared. We know what to do. We can react better and faster. So there's innate immune system not changing, like a little stupid, always doing the same thing. And then there's the acquired immune system. So since the acquired immune system in the idea of the conventional medicine is the only part that learns and that can be specific, that was the only part that we questioned if we did something, either a vaccine or a therapy or whatever. We always only looked at this acquired immune system. We looked at, does the system create antibodies? Does the system create memory T cells, memory B cells? Nobody looked at the innate system. But now, since 10 years, there are the first studies that show that the innate immune system learns and changes with every contact. And the innate immune system are the stem cells in the bone marrow, but also around the body, and the immune cells in the connective tissue, like macrophages and neutrophils and so on. So nobody looked at that. We have never looked at vaccines. What are they doing with the stem cells? We thought we're born with stem cells, we die with the same stem cells. That's it. But now we discover, oh my God, these stem cells change epigenetically with everything they come in contact. And that was the moment when the whole system in my mind came together at making sense. My interpretation is the stem cells, the innate immune system, the basis of it, that being the stem cells in the bone marrow, are in contact with everything around us. They react to electromagnetic waves, to light. They react to every part of a microbe that is coming through the blood to the lymphatic system of the bone marrow and then in contact with the stem cells. They have receptors. They know everything that's going around us. And they, to me, became the instance of creating a hologram in us of the world around us. And that's what I called selection and integration. So the immune system, let's look upon it from the other way. What is the task ultimately of the immune system? What is the task ultimately of us living? Ultimately, we're all here to be part of evolution. That's, I think, the ultimate thrive that we all have. And no one can take himself out of that part on Earth. We are all part of evolution. So if we start evolution and if we want to be part of evolution, we need to know where we are at this moment. That doesn't make sense that 8 billion people on this planet all do some kind of evolution on their own. So we're all connected. We know that. We all are part of this huge process of evolution. To be part of that, we have to know what is going on around us. Where are we? What is the path that we are at the moment? And the stem cells, to me, have this function. They are like the link between outside and inside to thrive evolution inside our system. So stem cells come in contact with everything. And I can maybe later even say something about the heritage that stem cells carry from our ancestors. Now they come in contact with new information. Let's say a new virus comes through our lungs, the skin, something we eat, and it goes in the bloodstream. From the bloodstream, it goes into the lymphatic system. In the lymphatic system, in the bone marrow, where we have 10% of our blood flow, it comes to the stem cells. Now, the stem cells have receptors. They recognize parts of this virus. And now is something that, to me, is very essential. The conventional medicine thinks that at that moment, the immune system decides evil or good, microbe or not, enemy or friend, fighting or not fighting. And that, to me, does not happen. because there is no evil. So why are the stem cells, or on what basis are the stem cells deciding what to do with this new information? And there was a fantastic row of studies done by Darya Kanduk, and she discovered that protein, the smallest protein structures called peptides, the ones that the receptors on the stem cell recognize, that these peptides are sometimes 99% similar between human and microbial. And she discovered that the stem cells only react to those peptides that have a lot of new information. So the stem cells are not separating between bad and good, or enemy and friend. They are just barely deciding, okay, this is interesting.
This is
new information.
Yeah.
Or, oh, this is what I already know. It's like when we get a new book. You look at the book, you see the cover, you go through the backside, you go through the table of contents, and then you decide, well, 90% I know, 10%, well, it's not worth reading it. But then you get the next book and you decide, wow, I know 20%, but there is a lot of new things in that book. So I do the effort, read the book, make it part of my knowledge, and have a better way of reacting in the future. And that's integration of new information. So that's what the stem cells do. And when they discover something new that is the right time to integrate this information, they change their genome epigenetically, which means from that moment on, other proteins will be created, other receptors will be created, other immune reactions will happen. And since the stem cell divides and provides new immune cells, this news will be distributed throughout the body. And the immune cells in the body will, from this moment on, react in a different way. And this is huge. So when we come in contact, we learn something from a new virus that nature has created, like an SMS or a text message that is going around the world in shortest time. And we integrate that information from this second on, our immune reactions will be different, and will be different lifelong until we start to change it again. So this is, just think about that, this is a part of the immune system that we have not looked at, and we still don't look at it. But now first studies come and they try to find out what happens with vaccines with this part of the immune system.
That was literally my question.
I know, that was my first question also. So I found studies saying that the tuberculosis vaccine, for example, which is a living bacteria, but from the cow, it's a bovine bacteria, it's not the human, it has been lab changed. When this comes in contact with the stem cells, it changes the stem cells forever, but in a different way than, of course, the natural microbe did. And this study says that lifelong immune reactions will be different after contact with this vaccine bacteria. That to me was a shock when I heard that this bacteria is coming into the bone marrow and changing stem cells forever. The studies found out that living vaccines, or in case of virus-based vaccine, when we vaccinate viruses that can still replicate, like the measles, rotavirus, the oral poliovirus vaccine that we have, these have a massive impact on this trained immunity. Trained immunity was the name given for this stem cell process. And of course, this stem cell change, this epigenetic change, will be transferred to our children.
Wow.
So this is one of the proofs for the epigenetic changes that we give over generations to our children. So the new immune system, in my what I call Medicine Reloaded, that's the title of my latest book. In the Medicine Reloaded, the immune system, first step is selection. mainly the stem cells, also the immune cells in the connective tissue. The connective tissue is the organ of the immune system. The lymphatic fluid is the organ of the immune system. They change epigenetically. They select and then they integrate information. And with this integration, they change epigenetically. When we talk about an immune cell in the connective tissue, this immune cell will sooner or later die, and this new information will die with it. When we talk about the stem cells, this information will never die. It is part of our system forever. It is like when we see something on TV and we see, an ugly picture, we cannot erase it. It is part of our system, and our reactions from now on will be different to every new input. So selection is the first one, and stem cells is the most important part of it. Selecting means, is it new? Is it the right time to integrate it? If yes, stem cells are integrating this information and changing epigenetically. And this information we use for two things. Number one is we're regulating better. We can now better react to every new input that we are confronted with. And the other one, apart from regulation of our system, is evolution, because that's what we're finally here for. This is our ultimate thrive. Let me give you an example. It was a researcher, Mrs. Margaret McNally, and she researched with little squids, and she found out that after they are born, in the next hours, they are swimming in the sea, they're in contact with millions of bacteria, viruses, whatever, and then their outer skin changes in a way that only one type of microbe, one type of bacteria can actually enter this little baby squid. When it enters it, and she describes like one bacteria does not make a change. When the fifth bacteria of this kind, it's a Vibrio, enters the organism, the whole organism inside changes, and it opens paths for these bacteria. They now go through this little baby squid until they reach a place where they are directed to. And at this place, they start to duplicate, and then they form an organ inside this little squid that makes light. And this light is essential for the squid because when it swims at night, it gives the impression to every fish or every animal that is below it that it is still the moonlight. So it's basically not visible. Usually it would shade the moonlight. But now, since we have these bacteria on the lower side of the squid, which make the same light that resembles the moonlight, all the organisms below do not recognize the squid swimming. So it's essential. It would not survive without this. And this is an absolutely essential process after birth with just especially this one microbe. And then these bacteria replicate throughout the day, and then throughout the night it shines. In the morning, the squid pushes out a huge percentage of this bacteria, and then there is no light. And then throughout the day, these bacteria replicate again. So at the evening, the squid shines. And I think this is what happens in our organism, and especially with the children's diseases. They are essential for our development. And sometimes it seems to me that if we vaccinate a child and we prevent that these bacteria, viruses are part of our system, our children might not shine anymore.
I completely agree. And like you said, there are studies showing the health benefits of having these childhood diseases. So that's very interesting. And also it's interesting, the little bacteria that they themselves have evolved to the place where they know that this is what they need to do. And maybe there's like something that they get out of the squid that's essential to their survival, obviously, because there's this symbiotic relationship or synergistic maybe relationship that's happening.
Absolutely. And a lot of parents, they describe that their children, after being through a childhood disease, there is like a
Developmental leap.
developmental step. In this new model of Medicine Reloaded, there is a new description of infection. Infection means, in our conventional medicine, infection means contact with a pathogen and fighting against that pathogen. That's infection. In the Medicine Reloaded, infection is exactly the opposite. It means recognizing new information and integrating that information. Learning and integrating is always effort. So it doesn't necessarily mean, and I mean, homeopaths knew that for the last 200 years, that fever is bad or symptoms are bad in every way. If it's part of this integration process, it's the effort to integrate that new information. And the reason for chronic disease in my new model is that we are missing microbes that we have not integrated, or we have integrated them in a false way. Like during the integration process, something happened. Fever was diminished too early by medicine, or the child or the patient was in another emotional stress during that integration process. So the integration itself was connected to a lot of traumatic stress. That's when the integration was not correct. So that's, for me, is the reason of chronic disease. Now, of course, what I hear next thing is, well, do you want that your child has polio? Do you want your child to have a measles encephalitis and die? Do you want your child to have tetanus and die? Of course not. So we have to look at, why are some people actually dying during this integration process? So we have to find out what was wrong. Why was this person not able to integrate? Some of the reasons might be that we are disturbing the integration process by interrupting it too early, whatsoever, not having the right environment, having too many toxins in the body, but also the task that the microbe has once we've integrated it, and we can use it as new information to react in a different way. If we overstress that reaction, of course we have symptoms. So if the task of one microbe is to detox the brain, well, if we put enormous amounts of toxins in the brain, we could overstress that reaction. And at the end, the inflammation that is the process of detoxifying is just too enormous. But the question is it the microbe to be blamed? Or was it the environment was the problem, the toxins that we put in there? And when it comes to poliomyelitis, you find that the epidemic of polio was the biggest at that time when we used the highest amount of DDT, which was a toxin for the nervous system. And with polio, I found an interesting study showing that when we come into contact with the poliovirus, the natural poliovirus, the same thing happens that happens in the squid. All the organs except the nervous system, they start to pour out interferon, and they stop the integration, or they stop the virus to replicate in these organs. The liver, the spleen, the pancreas, they all prevent the virus to replicate. Only in the nervous system, the gut and the nervous system, they don't pour out interferon. So it is kind of directed to these organs. We know the herpes viruses, they always stay in the nervous system. They are directed because they have to be part of the surveillance that we need in the nervous system. So I question myself, was nature so stupid to forget to tell the immune system to pour out interferon? You know, we come in contact with the poliovirus, and the study says, oh, good, all the organs were smart enough to pour out interferon. They prevented the poliovirus to replicate, but poor nervous system, there was something wrong in evolution. It doesn't pour out. I don't think so. I think evolution is the smartest process. And we have no idea of how complex this process and how complex our organism functions. We can only respect it. But I don't think that nature made a fault, So I think it was thought to be part of the nervous system, and it's part of the surveillance for brain tumors and brain toxins. But of course, if we overstress it and we put the brain full of toxins, what we did with DDT and the children, that's when there is an overactivation of that kind of virus. In the best try, and maybe the inflammation was the better way than the deterioration of the brain that happens with the toxins. So these are ideas, of course. It's a model. And I want to really emphasize that nothing in the conventional medicine that we have is obsolete. It all fits into the new model, but in a different context. So if you ask me, are you against or for vaccines? I can say from the bottom of my heart, I think vaccines are one of the smartest things we have developed, but not in the context of preventing childhood diseases for every child. But if we have a child that is already very sick due to other circumstances, maybe had an organ transplant, is taking immune suppressive medication, then we can suspect that this child would not be able to go through this integration process. It would just be too much for the system. Then we have the vaccine, and then we can prevent it. It's not the best way, but it's the best we can do for that child. So everything we did, antibiotics, surgery, of course, vaccines, the mononuclear steroids or monoclonal antibodies, perfect, fantastic inventions that we have. And they all fit in the new model. I'm not trying to go to good and evil into medical systems. I'm trying to come back to symbiosis in the medical systems as well. And homeopaths have their part in that new medicine reloaded just as well as every medical doctor and his knowledge has. And I think that must be our goal. We need to sit together, come up with a new model, and just reorganize what we have come up with so far.
That's a lot of information to integrate, but incredibly interesting. You've actually reminded me of Dr. Suzanne Humphrey's book, Dissolving Illusions, because she talks about DDT and polio in there. And I was going to ask you, when you said about the TB being a live vaccination, how that changes the bone marrow, the inflammation in the stem cells forever. And it made me wonder if you were using the TB nosode, like a homeopathic nosode or a TB vaccine detox, if that would then change that inflammation again in a more healthier, hopefully, function.
Absolutely. We two are so thinking alike. It's incredible. That, of course, when we now have a new model and we have an explanation for chronic diseases, ultimately we need solutions to help with the chronic diseases. And that was my first question. Now that we know about the stem cell trained immunity and this huge impact of, for example, vaccines, but also everything else that we have in our environment, like the medication in the water, in groundwater, what is the solution? And I'm absolutely convinced that the only way we have to reorganize that information, to bring back information that we haven't had in the past, is frequency therapy.
Yeah.
Frequency therapy, meaning homeopathy, bioresonance, trauma therapy, consciousness. That's the only way. We cannot go back and say, okay, let's take the measles virus, because we all have the antibodies now with the vaccine. I have them. I was vaccinated against measles, so I cannot just, reintegrate it now.
Yeah.
So we have to work with these epigenetic changes. And I think the only way is frequency medicine. And I know Einstein said that, Tesla said that, Hahnemann, of course, knew that. The miasma that Hahnemann was talking about, to me, now makes every sense in the world. I never really got the idea of it. I couldn't really, in my mind, understand what he was trying to say. Now I understand it. Miasma is the faulty integration of a microbe. if we're talking about tuberculosis, we had the vaccine, so we have never integrated in a correct way the human Mycobacteria tuberculosis, and that's the tuberculin miasma. Miasma means faulty integration or missing integration of that specific. So homeopathy, the no-sodes, exactly. And when I came up with that structure in my mind, or even 5 years ago when I started with the immune symbiosis, everything I found out I wanted to treat. So I could not find in homeopathy every remedy that I needed for what I found out. So I started to create my own remedies. It is homeopathy, C potencies. We call them frequency chords or complex chords, and they contain all potencies from C6 to C30. So C6, C7, C8, C9, everything is succussed by hand and then put together. And chord means that we have these 25 frequencies like a whole orchestra, a symphony. And I came up with this idea because when I worked with Klingenhardt, he's a big homeopath. I don't know if you know that, but his heart is homeopathy. No. Absolutely. And when we worked together in Seattle, he already started to put up boxes where he had, for example, Streptococcus, all 25 single vials, C6, C7, C8, C9. And we were testing with the ART testing. And he found out, okay, this patient needs C16 and this one needs C25. And maybe part of the strong reactions that we have to homeopathic remedies is because we haven't really been on the dot. You know, if you give him a C30 and he needs the C25, we're touching it, we're activating the subject, but it's not close enough. It's not on the dot. In my own practice back in Germany, I had these boxes and boxes for every microbe that I found out has its task in the system. Also for toxins, for everything that we need to bring that information into the system. And I tested for every patient, but that was a lot of work. And it was just not in practice, not doable, because the patient goes back home and does he take the whole box? And I tested throughout the day and I found out, well, in the morning it was C17. After having lunch with gluten and stress, it was C19. No. Having a good afternoon nap, it came back to C18. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do now? Living with the patient, testing every 10 minutes, giving him the correct potency. And that was the moment where I said, okay, in my heart, I know Vitulkas and Hahnemann are screaming, but I'll just put it together in a chord. And from the physical kind of view, we always have these electromagnetic waves. And the organism has this faulty electromagnetic wave. And when they both meet, what we have is the resulting wave that enables communication. And now we give the patient 25 waves, and there will just be this one that is physically creating this resulting wave. So I dared it, not sleeping well at that time because I wasn't sure this is really the right idea, since I am just strictly classical homeopathy, but it works. And that's my experience now for the last 5 years. And for 4 years, I was working with frequency chords. So we have frequency chord for the vaccines, for the microbes, for Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, tuberculosis, for glyphosate, aluminum, whatsoever, for remedies that we are all in contact with, statins or blood pressure medication, whatsoever. And now we have, I think, over 170 different frequency chords. The company is Sophia Viva that makes them available. They were just available for my patients for 4 years. And then there were more and more people asking for it. So now they made it available for everybody. And with these 170 frequency chords, work again became very complex and difficult. So we decided a year ago to even put different frequency chords together into complex chords. And again, I was like, okay, dear Hahnemann, I'm sorry, dear ritual guidelines are please.
I don't think Hahnemann would have minded. Just, he was experimenting all the way to the end. So I think he's like right there behind you. He may even have inspired you to do it.
Yeah, I think so too. And I feel inspired. I know that all these ideas are not my ideas, but somehow my stem cells are connected to these electromagnetic fields where a lot of people before me gave their information and their heart and their passion. And I was lucky enough to have my stem cells recognize it and bring it together. So I know this is the heritage that we have from these fantastic researchers. So now we have complex chords. We only now came down to 22. And now we are treating like a system, not only pinpointing to something. And now my therapy, when I work with patients, is based on complex chords, 2, 3, 4 different complex chords, which are available as a spray based on water and 0.9% salt, Himalayan salt. So it's like the physiological lymphatic fluid that we have, and you can spray it in the mouth. We have a lot of some lymphatic tissue here. You can spray it in the nose, and we apply it 2 times a day, 1 shot. And then when I pinpoint 1, 2 major impacts on the stem cells, which are usually in pregnancy, birth, and the first 4, 5, 6 years. This is where our main imprinting on the stem cells happen, including the ancestors, of course. When I pinpoint these, and I'm sure this is the pattern I see, it's the miasma, the most important miasma that I find. That's when I still use the frequency chord. So a patient might have 2 or 3 complex chords and then have 1 or 2 frequency chords to really nail down the most important issue.
That's very, very cool. I know that Dr. Joe will be asking you, why are you not using the Fibonacci potencies? Have you heard of Dr. Joe's work? He uses Fibonacci.
Yeah. I think the idea that Dr. Klinghardt had when he came up with these C6 to C30 was that he tested that other potencies higher than C30 are actually like the octaves on the piano.
Ah, yes.
These.
Yes. Okay,
in German it's called Obertöne. So it's like frequencies that are actually in resonance, or the same resonance then.
That makes sense.
And he was pretty sure that in between C6 and C30 we have the whole spectrum of possible frequencies. So maybe that covers that, but I know Fibonacci is something very interesting to look in also.
Definitely.
So far we're happy with this solution. And then I also use herbs, of course, alcohol extracts of herbs, but that's my main combination. And then what we always need is the trauma therapy, especially the traumas that are connected with the faulty integration of microbes. Yeah, it's like a melody. You might have a melody and you hear it and immediately you start crying, and there's 1,000 physical processes going on in your body creating stress because this melody was combined to a very special emotional trauma. And the same thing can happen with microbial information. It's just the same kind of information. It's all information. And every information can be connected to emotional trauma. So we have to make sure that this stress is also finding a way of healing. So part of this frequency treatment is always trauma treatment.
Always comes down to trauma, doesn't it? Everything.
Absolutely. And of course, we can change our stem cells a lot with our consciousness. And there's one thing that always touches my heart very deeply. I found out in studies that stem cells of the mother, or let's say that way, if sperm and egg come together, it's the genetics that combine. And genetics, that will be another topic. Genetics is nothing inscripted. It's flexible. It's fluid. Yeah, it's not in stone, right? But that's another 2 days we need. But the stem cell information is different to the genome of egg and sperm. But the stem cells of the mother enter the fetus or the embryo in the second trimester of pregnancy. That's when the bone marrow of the unborn is still not working. So the baby uses the stem cells of the mother to build. So this epigenetic information that the mother learned from her birth until she gave birth is transferred to the child. Now, backwards also, stem cells of the fetus enter the maternal organism already at 5 weeks of pregnancy. So even babies that we lost, we carry their stem cells. And the studies found out that these stem cells, they are used in the maternal organism to regenerate organs. So they go into different organs and start developing into these tissue cells with the genetic material of the child. This is the give and take during pregnancy. And also they enter the bone marrow and they can stay for decades. So every mother that was carrying a child up to 5 weeks is now a chimeric organism. It's based upon different stem cells. And genetic mutations that my own stem cells carried, I now have a pool of stem cells that have a different genetic mutation, and I can heal these. And these stem cells carry 50% of the genetic material of the father of the child. So we who carried children, we could do nothing better than being in good connection with that father.
Yeah.
Despite of disputes we might have had or whatever. But when it comes to the two of us created these stem cells and these children, I'm fine with that. And I'm absolutely in peace with that. And I agree that these stem cells are part of my organism now. I agree that I can profit from them. And our children, and that's something especially for women who lost children during pregnancy, they still live in our bone marrow, and we are still reproducing these stem cells, and they are still part of our organism. And I think that's incredible and very touching.
That really is. I thought for a second you were going to say we should try and have children with as many different men as possible, so we have different imprints.
Could be one of the solutions.
Information that we're receiving. Maybe let's not advocate for that. Oh my goodness. We need to talk about your incredible clinic as well. What you do there sounds really amazing. I had a look on the website and I said to my husband, because he's got all sorts of chronic issues, I was like, we need to save up. We need to send you to Germany to Ariane's clinic so she can sort you out, because I haven't had any good luck sorting him out.
Nice.
So tell us a little bit about your clinic. And I see you even work with holistic dentists and all sorts.
Yeah, but I have to say that I need a lot of time for the research. And I see one of my tasks as building up this library that we've talked about in the beginning, building new bricks for this new model and making it more and more stable. I need a lot of time for that. So I had to step back in the clinic a little bit. I can't work 5 days in the clinic and then research at night. So I had to step back a little bit, but I will always be in the clinic and I will always take care of patients because, well, first of all, that's also my deepest wish. And that is my source of ideas, actually.
Yes.
When I see patients and when I talk to patients, the anamnesis is 3 hours. That's not surprising for a homeopath.
Yeah.
But for everybody else, it's very surprising.
And it goes so fast. Those 3 hours just fly.
Absolutely. And I tried to find out what was going wrong in the stem cell trained immunity. What are the basic impacts? And then I come up with a treatment that they do at home based on the frequency and complex chords and the herbs. And we do the trauma therapy in the clinic, and they get the homework to work with it afterwards. It's time consuming if you really want to understand a little bit more. I think nobody will ever understand everything, but in the context of Medicine Reloaded, understand a little bit what was the cause of the symptoms 50 years ago. Now we're dealing with the symptoms. It's very time consuming, but I will continue to do that and try to help as many people. But also, I'm trying to do courses. I'm doing courses for other therapists, because ultimately more patients would profit from it, the more therapists we have that are treating patients in the context of immune symbiosis and Medicine Reloaded. I just gave a course 2 weeks ago, immune symbiosis workshop. I write the books. It was the 4th book now, the Medicine Reloaded. The one I wrote before is available in English. It's called, My Microbes Are Me.
Okay.
Symbolizing that it's inseparable. It's not my microbes and me. That's not possible. It's my microbes are me. The new one now is published in German, but ultimately I hope that we can reach people everywhere. And then, of course, I will be the first one to translate it.
You have to, because this new paradigm, this mind shift is really desperately needed, because we're seeing these like superbugs and everything else created because of our insistence on, the war against pathogens. So really, if we want to get rid of this epidemic of chronic disease that we have, we're going to have a completely different relationship with pathogens. I really love the message that you're putting out there. I was going to ask you as well, do you use ART for all of your remedy selections, like every single time? And can you just quickly tell our listeners what ART is? It's something that I was telling you before we start recording. There was a course on the 20th of June and we went overseas on the 22nd, so I couldn't join that course, but I'm really interested in doing it. The next one, unfortunately, is not until next year, so I'm going to have to wait a little bit. But can you quickly tell our listeners what ART is?
ART is the abbreviation of autonomic response testing. And it's a method of diagnosing and finding treatment that Dr. Klinghardt developed over the last, I think, at least 20 years. It's a kinesiologic testing in a special way. He had fantastic ideas of how to test the light field and how to discover especially these big issues that in some other methods of kinesiologic testing could be missed. And it is one of the things that I use in my clinic. But I have to say that my knowledge about the microbes, the Medicine Reloaded, immune symbiosis, and the anamnesis talk with the patient probably is 90 or 95% of my diagnosis and treatment plan.
Okay.
And then at the end, I use ART, and it's very fast then for about 20 minutes to check whether my thoughts were right.
Yeah.
To check whether I have missed something very important, and to find priorities. Because, a lot of times it's like, okay, I have 2 or 3 big issues here. Which is the one that we need to treat first? And then maybe the others, as a consequence, are even healing themselves. Because what we have to do as therapists is we don't have to accompany a patient until he's 100% healthy. We just have to push him up the hill and over this summit, and then self-regulation starts. And from there on, we can let go and have the respect for this complex system to come back to self-regulation and self-healing. So the smartest way for me is to find the biggest priority, and that's where ART testing can help me. But to use immune symbiosis and Medicine Reloaded, you can either use any other testing method. There's a lot of others. Every therapist has its own possibility to test. Or if you don't test at all, as I said, 90-95% is the knowledge about these patterns, the miasma patterns. What do I see as the basic issues of the stem cell trained immunity? What are the consequences? What symptom patterns give me the idea? Then, very important, a very comprehensive timeline of the patient, including ancestors, pregnancy, birth, childhood diseases, vaccines, accidents, emotional trauma. When did which symptoms start that we still see today, surgeries, and so on. And with these patterns, I find myself very well able to define these main causes. And if somebody is not having any testing possibility in the clinic, I think you can still very well use these ideas.
Incredible. Now, I'm just a little bit sad. Are you saying that Medicine Reloaded is not available in English?
At the moment, yes.
No.
Yeah, but so I know. I know, but it's just been a week that it's been published.
Okay.
I
so you'll have it translated by next week?
I think I'll start right when we stop the recording and I go start translating it. But thank you for being so enthusiastic about it. It's something that makes me very happy and is my drive to go on.
Incredible. And for our listeners who want to get hold of you, there's a couple of different websites. We'll put it in the show notes, but there's sophiahealth.de, and your daughter's name is Sophia, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And then ariane.zappe.de, but we'll have all that in the show notes if people want to get hold of you. And for our German listeners, you are so lucky that you can get the book Medicine Reloaded straight away and read that. All I can say is, ich verstehe sie nicht. But the rest of us,
the websites are in German and English.
Yes,
and
I saw
on
that.
Ariane-Zappe.de, there is also a specialized info part where you can sign up, and the newsletters are always in German and English.
Okay.
So we try to get information out as much as possible, and yes, I will translate the book.
Thank you. Dankeschön.
Bitteschön.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Ariane. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing the feedback from our listeners. I know this is going to be blowing the minds of many of our listeners. And I also am going to get in touch with the terrain theory guys, because they really need to have you on their podcast, because you totally, this is totally what their podcast is all about. So you definitely need to go on there as well. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, I thank you for the invitation and for the enthusiasm, and it makes me very happy. Thank you.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Tschüss.